Hello again. Let's talk about fascism. Now, fascism has rarely been properly discussed or critiqued because fascism, in the post-war era, has been simply symbolized as a series of aesthetic choices and hierarchies and some paternalism. The modern media has done a terrible job at examining fascism from an internal perspective and from a governance perspective. And one of the things I want to talk about today is how fascism is fundamentally limited. It has a very hard time growing beyond a certain capacity. Now, that's not to endorse communism or liberalism. We're just talking about fascism here for today. Fascism, because it emphasizes aesthetic appeal and a young masculine vitality, in many ways fascism worships vitality. Fascism has a very difficult time, especially its leaders have a very difficult time, with what happens when they get old. You may have seen some memes going around not too long ago about Richard Spencer getting somewhat portly in his complexion, and that's one of the fundamental problems we're dealing with, because the fascist leadership effectively has to go from a young, vital political movement to a wise paternal figure before they hit 50. That leaves them not a whole lot of time, only about a couple decades, to achieve this political foundation that they're seeking. And if they don't do that, then they start to get old. And the vitalistic spirit of fascism, the vitalistic sort of masculine spirit of fascism, doesn't support competent but decrepit older leadership. Again, that's not to endorse the gerontocracy either. We have far too many old people in our political system in the West right now. However, it's necessary to understand the limits of the fascist ideology in terms of propping up its own philosophical position. So for a king, you can have your Theoden old wise king types. Like, that's a cliche for a reason. You can have an old king that's known to be wise and govern his realm well. But it's very difficult to have an old fascist activist. You can have an old communist, and we're currently plagued by old liberals. But it's very difficult to have an old fascist, because an old fascist specifically goes against the type of masculine vital spirit that fascism is supposedly ideologically based around. Now, it can work, and it has worked in the past, but to work, that spirit, the leadership, has to take control of the society and then prop up younger individuals as propaganda pieces in order to maintain an emphasis on that vitalism. Fascism is social Darwinism. It worships the tribe. It worships the vital aesthetic spirit of the tribe. And if the leader can't achieve that position of power, then those who would have supported him will move on to other younger, more vital individuals that can. And so fascism sees this rotating cast of individuals. You even in the modern era, Rockwell to your Richard Spencer, to your Nick Fuentes, and I assume we're going to get a couple others after that. The problem, of course, is it's very difficult to have a political movement incapable of a long march through the institutions. That's what communists have done in Western Europe and in the United States, is they have built up these massive bureaucracies, and they've built up this mess of rules over the course of 3 or 4 generations that make it functionally impossible for us to have a working society. But they didn't do that in a single generation. And one of the flaws of fascism isn't that they don't think multi-generationally, they do. The problem with fascism is that their leadership can't act multi-generationally, because one grand vision will give way to the next over time. And I like vitalism, don't get me wrong. I think vitalism is a key aspect to the world that we're moving into. But I also think that we need to be willing to act multi-generationally. We need to be willing to establish a code of conduct, establish an ideological foundation, and then build upon it for the next generation, rather than trying to accomplish everything ourselves all in one go. There's bugs everywhere out here. So the best way forward, then, is to understand that none of these secular religions work. Communism is a self-defeating system. It's been critiqued so many times. Liberalism is a complete mess if you lose your strong moral foundation. Because unlike fascism and communism, liberalism doesn't create a holistic worldview. It requires a pre-existing worldview to establish as its own foundation. In the West, that was Christianity. Liberalism also sees any taboo or restriction to the body politic as an attack upon individual liberty, and so liberalism will always attack its own moral foundation. So liberalism doesn't work either. In the United States at this point, I think that the Christian nationalists seem to have taken center stage. I predicted this a couple of years ago in my articles, if you read my Substack, linked below. This new form of Christian nationalism that's developing is somewhat vitalistic, but it doesn't overemphasize vitalism. And I think that there's a way to thread this needle, especially with the use of digital systems, to prevent a sort of corporate communist takeover of the United States. Some would say that we're at the beginning of the second axial age. I would say that. The second axial age is going to see a lot of philosophies, a lot of discussion of ideas that we haven't really brought forth for a long time, not since before John Locke. The idea of giving of the self in order to preserve the body politic, the Leviathan of Thomas Hobbes, has given way now to the Leviathan of Sam Francis. And I don't want to live in a world governed wholly by bureaucracy. So it's time for something new. And I think the first step of that is to recognize the need, especially in the West, for this Christian nationalist foundation. And once that's concluded, then we'll be able to build upon the foundation that national exceptionalism is creating. The cicadas are a lot louder than they sound like in the video, I think. I've got a microphone right here, and hopefully this video sounds pretty good. I do declare that it is hot in the Deep South.